So when we're learning a second language, sooner or later we come to the question of accent. Oftentimes people ask me what the different accents are in the United States, and they are somewhat surprised when they hear about the various accents that we have. Basically in the United States, and this is my impression, this isn't really based on any research, but in the United States we have four general families of accents. We have a Hollywood accent, we have a Northern accent, we have a Southern accent, and we have an Eastern accent. So I'd like to talk about each of these in turn. The accent that perhaps non-native speakers of English are most familiar with is the Hollywood accent. This is the generic accent. It's the accent that is most widespread in films, Hollywood films. It's the most widespread in national news coverage. So if you're watching CNN International, if you're watching NBC, or if you're watching any of these major news channels, chances are the newscasters are speaking in a Hollywood accent. Oftentimes we consider the Hollywood accent the un-accent. What do I mean by that? What you are hearing now from me is more or less the Hollywood accent. And when speaking with a friend who was from Boston, we'll momentarily return to that, who has a significant accent, I asked her what accent I speak in, and she said, "Oh, that's easy, you have no accent." So, incidentally, there's this assumption that people who speak with the Hollywood accent have no accent. Usually the Hollywood accent takes on, or the Hollywood accent covers the Western United States. Next we have the Northern accent. This accent is the least widespread, perhaps, or at least the least well-known, and therefore oftentimes it's the most striking and the most humorous to Americans themselves. This accent is very, very bland, I guess you could say. They elongate many of their vowels. It's very widespread in the northern states, including Alaska. It's mostly centered around the Great Lakes. It was made famous by the movie Fargo, which was made by the Coen brothers. In fact, shortly after the movie was released, people would travel to the northern states just to ask people to say hello to them. The greeting that is most commonly used in the area of Fargo, North Dakota, was made famous in this movie. So that's your northern accent. The southern accent is perhaps the most common of the accents. At least when you think about accents in the United States, the most common one that comes to mind is the southern accent. Mind you, the Hollywood accent is not considered an accent, or it's considered the un-accent. So the southern accent is very spicy. There's a significant twang, especially at the ends of the words. It's considered many times the most un-elite of the accents, the most unrefined. And it's interesting to see how perhaps some politicians prefer to increase their southern accent in order to seem like they are not from the elite establishment, or that they are part of the people. The southern accent is confined mostly to the southern states, so this would be everything from Texas to Florida and perhaps even up to Virginia. The final of the accents would be the eastern accent. This accent is centralized mostly in the eastern states, New England, as we like to say, from Maine down and probably until the New Jersey area. This accent is very raw. It's very, very rough even. What this accent tends to do is remove R's from where R's should be and add R's to where R's should not be at the end of words. So for example, instead of saying car, they will say ka. Instead of saying idea, they will say idea. And so we see that while the number of R's in their accent is the same, they're just in different spots. The last thing I'd like to say about these accents are that These are just main families of accents. Of course, each location is probably going to have its own patois, it's going to have its own way of speaking, it's going to have its own variation of the accent. So you might meet somebody from Houston and you might meet somebody from, say, Fort Lauderdale. They're both going to have a general southern accent, but they're probably going to have their own variation of it because they grew up in different areas. You might meet somebody from Fargo and you might meet somebody from Anchorage. They'll both have a northern accent, but they're going to have their own variation thereof. And oftentimes, although national newscasters do use the Hollywood accent, local news is most often presented in the local accent. And that's my impression of accents in the United States.